You're at a party, surrounded by people laughing, talking, making noise. The lights are bright, the music is loud, and everyone seems genuinely happy. You smile when someone makes a joke, nod when they tell a story, laugh when everyone laughs. On the outside, you're the perfect image of a sociable and well-adjusted person. Inside, you feel like you're watching everything through thick glass. Every smile you force hurts a little more. Every empty conversation leaves you more exhausted. And when you finally get home, you look in the mirror and whisper, "Who is this person I pretend to be?" Franz Kafka knew this feeling intimately. He once wrote, "Solitude is painful when one is young, but delightful when one matures." What he knew, and what you'll discover in the next few minutes, is that there's a profound difference between being alone and pretending to be someone you're not. A difference that can completely transform the way you relate to yourself and the world. The pain of pretending is one of the most universal and at the same time most silent experiences of the human condition. It's the feeling of carrying a mask so heavy that you forget what your real face looks like underneath. Mariana, 34, worked at a marketing company where everyone was super positive all the time. She woke up every morning preparing to play the role of the motivated employee, the fun colleague, the person who had everything under control. For months, she maintained this impeccable performance. She received praise, was invited to happy hours, seemed perfectly integrated. But every night, when taking off her work clothes, she felt like she was peeling off skin that wasn't hers. The exhaustion didn't come from the work itself, but from the constant effort of maintaining a persona that drained her vital energy. One day, she realized she could no longer remember what her natural laugh sounded like. All her smiles had become automatic, calculated, empty. Kafka described this perfectly when he said, "I am made of literature. I cannot be anything else." But unlike the Czech writer who found his truth in literature, Mariana was lost in a fiction she had created about herself. The social mask isn't just a disguise we occasionally wear. It becomes a second skin, a layer of protection that paradoxically separates us from ourselves and others. We start wearing these masks as children when we learn that certain parts of us are accepted and others aren't, that our sadness bothers adults, that our anger is ugly, that our vulnerability is weakness. So we create edited versions of ourselves, versions that receive love, attention, approval. And gradually we forget that there's someone real underneath all this performance. The problem isn't in adapting our behavior to different contexts. That's social intelligence. The problem arises when we completely lose contact with our essence, when our entire life becomes a performance to please audiences who might not even care that much about us. Kafka lived this experience extremely in his relationship with his father, Franz Kafka. In the famous Letter to His Father, he revealed how he spent decades trying to be the son his father would approve of, sacrificing his own nature in the process. "Before you, I lost confidence in myself, and in exchange gained an infinite feeling of guilt," he wrote. This guilt, this feeling of always playing the role of yourself poorly, is something that deeply resonates with anyone who has ever felt imprisoned by their own masks. It's fascinating to notice how Kafka transformed this pain into art, but for most of us, the struggle against social masks happens in the silence of our homes, in moments when we let our guard down and see ourselves as we really are. Pedro, a 28-year-old lawyer, told how for a long time he believed his worth as a person depended on his ability to impress others. He memorized jokes, studied various subjects to have something to talk about in any conversation, created stories that made him seem more interesting than he felt. It worked for a while. He was popular, invited to events, considered charismatic. But one night, after a party where he had been especially brilliant, he found himself crying in the car without understanding why. It was as if his entire personality was a house of cards that collapsed the moment he was alone with himself. He realized he no longer knew his own genuine opinions, his real tastes, his true feelings. Everything had been molded to please, to fit in, to be accepted. And at the center of all this elaborate construction, he was completely lost. Solitude, when consciously chosen, becomes an act of rebellion against this social imposition of always being on, always upbeat, always well. Kafka found in solitude not just refuge, but clarity. It's in silence that we can hear our own voice, distinguish our real thoughts from those we absorb from others. It's in purposeful isolation that we can experiment with who we are when no one is watching, when we don't need to please, impress, or convince anyone. But this is a very different solitude from the loneliness that arises from forced isolation or social rejection. It's the solitude of self-discovery, not abandonment. It's the solitude that nourishes, not the one that devours. Kafka wrote mainly at dawn, when the world slept, and he could finally be entirely himself. In these moments of creative solitude, he wasn't fleeing from humanity. He was approaching his own deeper and more authentic humanity. There's an almost indescribable freedom in stopping pretending. It's like breathing for the first time after years of holding your breath. When Mariana, the marketing professional I mentioned earlier, finally decided she could no longer sustain her artificial professional persona, something interesting happened. She started small. Instead of automatically agreeing with everything in meetings, she allowed herself to disagree when she really disagreed. Instead of forcing laughs at jokes she didn't find funny, she simply smiled politely. Instead of feigning enthusiasm for projects that left her indifferent, she was honest about her preferences. At first, she was afraid of being rejected, fired, excluded. But what she discovered was that the people around her not only tolerated her authenticity, many were relieved. Other colleagues began opening up too, tired of their own performances. She realized she wasn't the only one living a facade life, and that her courage to be real gave permission for others to do the same. Of course, she also lost some superficial connections, but the relationships that remained became infinitely more meaningful and nourishing. The journey back to authenticity isn't simple or linear. Kafka knew this better than anyone. He struggled his entire life with the tension between the need for social belonging and the need for personal integrity. In his diaries, he wrote about feeling like a stranger in his own body, in his own family, in his own world. But it's precisely this feeling of displacement that can become a compass for our inner truth. When something doesn't sound genuine to us, when a situation makes us feel like bad actors playing a role we don't understand, our discomfort is signaling that we're moving away from our essence. The problem is, we learn to ignore these internal signals, to silence our intuition in the name of social adaptation. Relearning to listen to this inner voice requires practice, patience, and a good dose of courage, because often it will tell us things we don't want to hear, ask us for changes we'd prefer to avoid, show us truths that shake structures we've relied on for years. Pause here for a moment. Have you ever felt like you were screaming into the void, waiting for someone, anyone, to really understand who you are underneath all these masks you wear every day? That feeling of being surrounded by people, but completely isolated inside? I know you have, because you wouldn't be here if you didn't know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've ever lived this loneliness that hurts in your chest, write in the comments just, "I feel it too." You don't need to explain anything else. Just these 3 words, because when you do that, you're telling someone else who feels this way that they're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, you'll also remember that you're not. Pedro's transformation was gradual but profound. He began experimenting with small moments of honesty. Instead of inventing stories to impress on dates, he started sharing real experiences, even the simpler or more vulnerable ones. Instead of agreeing with popular opinions to fit in, He expressed his own views, even when divergent. Gradually, he discovered that people felt more connected to him when he was genuinely imperfect than when he tried to be artificially impressive. His relationships became deeper because they were based on who he really was, not who he pretended to be. Of course, not everyone stayed. Some friendships that depended on his social performance dissolved naturally. But those that remained gained a quality of intimacy and trust he had never experienced before. He discovered that being rejected for being authentic hurts much less than being accepted for a lie. Because when we're rejected being ourselves, at least we know the rejection isn't really about us, it's about genuine incompatibility. But when we're accepted for a mask, we live with the constant fear that acceptance will disappear the moment we let our guard down. Kafka taught us that literature should be the axe for the frozen sea within us. Similarly, authenticity should be the axe for the frozen sea we create around us when we live trapped in social performances. Every moment of honesty is a crack in the ice. Every time we choose to be real instead of convenient, we're breaking a little more of this frozen surface that keeps us separated from our own life. The process is uncomfortable because it means confronting parts of us we've buried, accepting aspects of our personality we consider unacceptable, and risking not being understood or accepted. But it's also the path to a freedom most people never experience, the freedom to be entirely yourself, without edits, without filters, without exhausting performances. Conscious solitude becomes then a laboratory for this authenticity. It's in silence that we can experiment with different aspects of ourselves without external judgment. It's alone that we can cry when we need to cry, laugh when something really amuses us, be silent when we have nothing to say. It's in solitude that we rediscover our natural rhythms, our genuine tastes, our real opinions. Kafka spent hours alone, walking the streets of Prague, observing, thinking, feeling. These moments weren't of sick isolation, but of deep nourishment of his soul. He knew he could only write with authenticity if he first found authenticity within himself. And to find it, he needed space, silence, and the courage to be alone with himself, without distractions. The paradox of authenticity is that when we stop trying to please everyone, we often end up creating deeper and more meaningful connections. When Mariana stopped playing the perfect employee at work, she discovered colleagues who were also tired of the culture of false positivism. They formed friendships based on real conversations about genuine challenges, not just superficial exchanges of empty pleasantries. When Pedro stopped creating impressive personas, he attracted people who valued substance instead of spectacle. Their conversations became more interesting because they were based on genuine mutual curiosity, not competition to see who could seem more fascinating. Both discovered that there are people in the world who prefer imperfect authenticity to polished performances. People who, like them, were tired of living on the surface of things and yearned for real connections. But the journey to authenticity also requires us to face our own internal resistance. Kafka wrote about feeling like a stranger even to himself, and this is a common experience when we begin to question the masks we've worn for so long. Who are we when we're not trying to be who we think we should be? What personality emerges when we stop molding our behavior to external expectations? Sometimes the answer is scary because we discover we no longer know. We've spent so much time being other versions of ourselves that we've lost contact with our original essence. It's like looking in a mirror after years and not recognizing the reflected face. But this initial disorientation is a necessary part of the rediscovery process. You have to get a little lost to truly find yourself. Modern culture makes this journey even more challenging because we're constantly bombarded with messages about who we should be, how we should feel, what version of success we should pursue. Social media has created infinite platforms for social performance, where even our vulnerability becomes a way to create an image. Kafka didn't have to deal with this, but faced equally intense social pressures in his era. His father's expectation that he follow a traditional career, the rigid social norms of Austro-Hungarian society, the demands of conformity that suffocated his artistic and introspective nature. He found in writing a way to be entirely honest, even if it was only on paper. Today, we need to find our own spaces of total honesty, our own territories where we can exist without masks. The fear of rejection is, obviously, one of the biggest obstacles to authenticity. From childhood, we learn that certain parts of us are accepted and others aren't. Our anger, our sadness, our strangeness, our intensity, our quietness, any aspect that doesn't fit family or social expectations, is gradually suppressed or disguised. We develop palatable versions of ourselves to guarantee love, acceptance, belonging. The problem is, these edited versions become golden prisons. We receive love and acceptance, but don't feel really seen or understood because what's being accepted isn't really us. Kafka described this as living like a ghost among the living, physically present but absent in essence. The courage to show who we really are, with all our imperfect and maladjusted aspects, is what allows us to finally experience genuine connection. There's also a particular loneliness that comes from being misunderstood, even when we're being authentic. Kafka felt this intensely. Even when expressing his deepest truth in his writing, he often felt isolated and misunderstood. His books were rejected, his relationships were complicated, his sensitivity was seen as weakness. But he preferred this honest solitude to the false connection that came from playing socially acceptable roles. There's a dignity in being rejected for who you really are that never exists when you're accepted for a lie. When we live authentically, not everyone will understand or approve of us, but those who stay form connections based on genuine mutual recognition, not convenience or appearance. The practice of authenticity can begin with small daily experiments. Instead of automatically responding, "I'm fine," when someone asks how you are, you can pause and give a more honest answer. Instead of agreeing with opinions that don't reflect your view just to avoid conflict, you can gently express your different perspective. Instead of hiding aspects of your personality you consider inappropriate, you can allow them to appear in safe contexts. Kafka wrote in his diaries with brutal honesty about his fears, his insecurities, his internal contradictions. These diaries weren't for publication, they were exercises in radical authenticity where he could be entirely human without filters. Each of us needs to find our own spaces for this radical honesty, whether through writing, art, deep conversations with trusted friends, or simply in moments of silent reflection with ourselves. What's interesting is that when we begin practicing authenticity, we often discover that many of our masks were unnecessary. The people around us were equally tired of superficial performances and yearned for real connections. The perfect employee discovered colleagues who also questioned artificial corporate culture. The charismatic guy discovered friends who preferred genuine conversations to social entertainment. In both cases, one person's courage to be real created permission for other people to do the same. It's as if we were all waiting for someone to take off their mask first, so we'd feel safe to take off ours. Kafka, through his literature, did this for countless readers. His courage to explore the strangest and most uncomfortable aspects of human experience gave permission to others to recognize and explore their own dark and complex territories. Solitude becomes thus not a punishment, but a gift we give ourselves. A protected space where we can exist without justifications, explanations, or performances. Where we can feel our real feelings, think our genuine thoughts, be exactly who we are in this moment, without edits. Kafka valued these moments of creative solitude so much that he organized his entire life to protect them. He worked during the day to support himself financially, but reserved the early hours for being entirely himself through writing. In these moments, he wasn't fleeing from the world. He was preparing to relate to the world in a more authentic and meaningful way. Conscious solitude teaches us that our own company can be deeply nourishing when we stop criticizing ourselves and start knowing ourselves with curiosity and compassion. You've ever looked in the mirror and felt like you were seeing a stranger, like the reflected person wasn't really you, but just a version you built to please everyone except yourself. This painful disconnection between who you are inside and who you show the world. If you know this feeling of living like an actor playing a character in your own life, write, "I want to find myself." Because when you admit this, you're giving permission for other people to also take off their masks, even if it's just for a moment. True freedom doesn't come from having all the answers or being perfect. It comes from having the courage to be imperfectly real. Kafka never considered himself an example of mental health or social success, but his willingness to explore and express his complex and contradictory human experience made him immortal in world literature. His radical authenticity, even being uncomfortable and sometimes disturbing, created a bridge of recognition with millions of readers who saw themselves reflected in his honest strangeness. When you choose to be authentic, even in the simplest and most everyday moments, you're creating the same possibility of real connection with the people around you. You're offering something the world desperately needs: permission to be truly human. The path back to authenticity has no final destination because we are beings in constant evolution. Who you are today can be different from who you'll be tomorrow, and that's perfectly natural. Authenticity isn't about finding a fixed and immutable version of yourself. It's about maintaining an honest and fluid connection with who you're being at each moment. Kafka continued writing and questioning until the end of his life, never satisfied with simple answers or rigid identities. His willingness to remain curious about his own complexity is part of what makes his work so enduring and touching. Similarly, your personal journey of authenticity is a living, dynamic process that requires constant but gentle attention. One of the most profound revelations in this journey is discovering that our desperate need for external approval often keeps us trapped in diminished versions of ourselves. Inna, a 31-year-old artist, spent years creating works she knew would be well received by the market, completely ignoring her true creative voice. Her paintings sold well, received praise, were considered commercially viable, but every night she lay down with a feeling of emptiness she couldn't name. It was as if she was betraying something sacred inside her with each brushstroke calculated to please. The turning point came when she found by chance some old canvases she had painted as a teenager, before knowing that art should be marketable. They were strange, intense, imperfect, but pulsed with a life that her current works didn't have. She realized she had spent more than a decade negotiating her artistic soul in exchange for financial security and social approval. From that moment, she began experimenting with small acts of creative rebellion. She mixed unpopular techniques, explored overly personal themes, allowed her inner strangeness to emerge on canvas. Sales initially decreased, but something much more valuable emerged. She began to recognize herself in her own work again. Kafka faced similar pressures in his time. His father expected him to follow a respectable career in law, and for years he tried to balance family demands with his inner need to write. He worked during the day as an insurance company employee, playing the role of responsible son and productive citizen. But his true, vital energies were reserved for the early morning hours when he could finally connect with his deeper nature through writing. He described this division as living two parallel lives, one public and acceptable, another private and genuine. What's interesting is that it was precisely his courage to honor this private life, even against all external expectations, that produced literary work that continues touching people more than a century later. His private authenticity became his most lasting contribution to humanity. The question of time is also crucial in this discussion. We live in a culture of speed, where quick decisions are valued and deep reflection is seen as luxury or procrastination. But knowing yourself authentically is a slow, organic process that cannot be forced or artificially accelerated. Kafka spent hours walking alone through Prague's streets, not because he was fleeing responsibility, but because he knew his mind needed time and space to process the complexity of his internal experience. These moments of apparent unproductivity were, in fact, crucial investments in his psychological and creative health. In our age of constant notifications and mandatory multitasking, creating protected time to simply be with yourself becomes an almost revolutionary act. The connection between authenticity and creativity is particularly fascinating. When we stop spending energy trying to be who we think we should be, we free up an impressive amount of psychological resources for genuine exploration and original expression. Pedro, after he stopped playing the role of the interesting guy at parties, discovered he had a natural capacity to listen to people deeply. His social life changed completely. Instead of being the center of attention telling elaborate stories, he became the friend everyone sought when they needed a real conversation. Mariana, when she stopped feigning constant enthusiasm at work, discovered she had genuinely innovative ideas for marketing campaigns, ideas that arose naturally when she stopped trying to impress and started thinking genuinely about interesting problems. Anna, by allowing her strangeness to emerge in her art, developed a unique style that eventually attracted buyers who valued originality instead of familiarity. There's also a profound spiritual dimension in choosing authenticity over social performance. When we honor who we really are, we're participating in something greater than our own convenience or individual success. We're contributing to the genuine diversity of human experience, offering our unique perspective to the collective mosaic of consciousness. Kafka intuited this when he wrote that a book should be the axe for the frozen sea within us. He knew that his brutal honesty about the most uncomfortable aspects of human existence could liberate something in his readers, help them break their own frozen surfaces of denial and conformity. When you choose to be authentic in your daily life, you're creating similar waves around you, giving silent permission for others to also remove their masks. The paradox is that the more specific and particular we are in our authenticity, the more universally we touch other people. Kafka's works are deeply personal, born from his specific neuroses, his particular fears, his unique circumstances. And precisely because they're so specific, they manage to capture something essential about the human condition that resonates in completely different cultures and eras. Similarly, when you have the courage to speak about your own specific experiences of inadequacy, loneliness, or search for meaning, you often discover that other people recognize themselves in your particularity. Your individual strangeness becomes a bridge for universal connection. Conscious solitude also teaches us about the natural rhythm of intimacy. Authentic relationships cannot be forced or accelerated through performances. They develop organically when two or more people feel safe to be real with each other. This requires time, patience, and the willingness to tolerate the uncomfortable moments that arise when masks are removed. Kafka had few close friends, but the friendships he cultivated were deeply meaningful. He preferred quality to quantity, connections based on genuine mutual recognition instead of social convenience. His romantic relationships were complicated precisely because he refused to play the role of conventionally charming boyfriend, preferring painful honesty to superficial harmony. This willingness to accept temporary discomfort in the name of long-term authenticity is a skill our instant gratification-oriented culture rarely teaches. Authenticity also requires that we develop tolerance for ambiguity and contradiction in ourselves. Kafka was simultaneously an obedient employee and a rebellious artist, a devoted son and a severe critic of family conventions, a man who yearned for connection and at the same time intensely valued his solitude. Instead of trying to resolve these contradictions or choose a side, he learned to inhabit the tension between them. This capacity to accept our own multiplicity is crucial for living authentically because real human beings are complex, contradictory, multifaceted. The pressure to be consistent and predictable often forces us to suppress legitimate aspects of our personality that don't fit into a coherent narrative about who we are. Embracing our internal inconsistency is part of embracing our complete humanity. Finally, it's important to recognize that the journey to authenticity isn't a linear progression from false to true, from hidden to revealed. It's more like a continuous dance between different aspects of ourselves, a constant negotiation between our needs for connection and our need for integrity. There will be days when you choose social harmony over individual expression, and that doesn't mean you've failed at being authentic. There will be moments when you need your masks to feel safe, and that's also part of caring for yourself with compassion. The goal isn't to completely eliminate all social adaptation, but rather to maintain a conscious connection with who you are underneath the adaptations, so they don't become prisons that separate you from your own life. If you've come this far, it's because you feel there's something deeper waiting for you. You're not alone in this search. This channel exists for those who, like Kafka, understand that life's most important questions don't have easy answers, but deserve to be explored with courage and honesty. Every week, we create a safe space where you can pause, breathe, and rediscover your own inner wisdom. Subscribe not just to receive notifications, but to be part of a community that believes your journey of self-discovery is sacred. Together, we'll transform existential solitude into a path of profound self-knowledge. Because you deserve to find your truth, even if it's different from everything you've heard before. And remember, being alone doesn't hurt more than pretending. In fact, it's in courageous silence with yourself that you finally find the freedom to be entirely who you always were underneath all the masks.